The modern management ideal is the flat hierarchy. It is a system designed around the premise that leadership should prioritize vulnerability, absolute transparency, and continuous alignment across every node of the network. Watch how this highly connected, consensus-driven system behaves under pressure. A red alert introduces a crisis. Instantly, the network floods with overlapping communication. Seeking alignment, the system creates a massive bottleneck and freezes entirely under the weight of its own feedback loops. Now observe a vertical hierarchy reacting to the same crisis. The red alert triggers an immediate unilateral cutoff by a central node. The affected branch is severed. The rest of the system stabilized instantly. The time spent seeking emotional consensus allows a localized crisis to spread before defense is even authorized. In high-stakes environments, the friction of empathy-led negotiation delays the surgical actions required for survival. When a system requires collective moral validation for every choice, no individual actually owns the consequences. Structural cowardice is the inevitable result of collaboration without command. Accountability has decayed. Leaders now use public apologies and emotional language to regain sympathy rather than fixing the underlying structure. Machiavelli's 16th-century realism provides a rigorous antidote to this modern moral theater. This is the 1532 title page of Il Principe, or The Prince. Machiavellian realism focuses on the pragmatic acceptance of the true cost of power and systemic preservation. True accountability is the unilateral, unapologetic ownership of outcomes. It requires an absolute refusal to participate in the collective emotional processing of a decision. In a digital ecosystem, authority is sustained entirely by what is seen. Controlling this requires the first mechanism of realist governance, perception engineering. This graph maps leader visibility against perceived authority. As visibility passes a critical threshold, authority plummets. The graph transforms into digital timelines. Frequent communication nodes vanish into static. Only rare, isolated nodes pulse with high impact. Language is frequently used to surrender power. Soft, consensus-seeking phrases like, "I don't want to impose my view," must be replaced with directive, inevitable phrasing, such as, "This is the direction we are taking." Scarcity commands respect. A leader's time, attention, and words must be engineered as scarce commodities. Authority must be projected with absolute finality. A leader who constantly explains themselves or competes for algorithmic attention has already ceded control to the audience. Modern management culture often confuses fear with emotional volatility or interpersonal intimidation. This matrix compares affection-based compliance against fear-based compliance. And in organizational context, calibrated fear is the absolute predictable certainty of structural consequences, such as performance metrics and compliance audits. Affection is a highly fragile, exhausting variable. It requires the leader to continuously perform, praise, and motivate to maintain operational momentum. The energy required to sustain this state rapidly drains the system. Fear functions passively. When enforcement is mechanical and predictable, fear internalizes into self-discipline. Historical power structures utilized physical architecture to create this same omnipresent pressure. The Palazzo Vecchio in Florence was designed to loom over the city, exerting control without a single word being spoken. Affection collapses under operational stress, but calibrated fear is a self-sustaining engine. Enduring systems survive on a deep respect for consequence.
Every corporate or political system reaches a threshold where leniency becomes negligence. A failing division, left unchecked, will eventually drain capital from the healthy whole. Machiavelli defined the solution as crueltà bene usata, well-used cruelty. These actions must be strictly necessary, swift, decisive, final, and publicly clear. Consider this logic tree representing a corporate structure. If the compassionate delay path is selected, involving phased layoffs and prolonged negotiations, a corrupted node slowly bleeds its failure into neighboring sectors, degrading the entire system over time. The realist alternative is a single surgical severance of the failing component. The localized cut causes pain, but the surrounding network instantly fortifies and stabilizes. Modern executives frequently mask necessary severity with euphemisms like restructuring, or delegate the firing process entirely to human resources to protect their own image. Utility always precedes morality in systemic survival. Avoiding necessary severity does not eliminate suffering, it merely transfers the pain of indecision onto the innocent and competent. In Machiavellian thought, all structural outcomes are governed by two forces. The first is fortuna, the world's unpredictable chaos and volatility. The second is virtu, the structural capacity to control and absorb that chaos. Modern leaders frequently fail because they plan for stability. The realist assumes disaster and builds architecture to survive it. True virtue requires diagnosing systemic weaknesses by studying repeating historical patterns of failure. Machiavelli himself studied the historian Titus Livius, seen here, to anticipate how chaos dismantles unprepared states. In modern corporate terms, virtu means engineering redundancy, distributing vulnerability across multiple supply chains, and hoarding decision capacity long before a crisis hits. Chaos functions as a permanent auditor, brutally exposing organizations built on luck rather than preparation. The ultimate business myth is the indispensable, highly visible, charismatic visionary leader. Charisma is a single point of failure. It creates a cult of personality where obedience is tied entirely to an individual's mood. When motivation is tied to a leader's personality rather than a fixed role, action becomes performative. Subordinates prioritize tasks that capture the leader's attention, stalling the quiet, essential functions of the organization that lack a spotlight. Watch what happens when that charismatic leader eventually falters or steps down. The central node flickers and dies. Instantly, the entire board collapses inward. An organization governed by devotion to a personality is a house built on air. It disintegrates the exact moment admiration shifts or the leader is absent. The ultimate counterintuitive goal of the Machiavellian leader is to willingly engineer their own obsolescence. Institutionalization converts intuition into procedure and commands into algorithms. The charisma hub hard-codes its logic, replacing personal connections with interlocking gears. This creates an anonymous bureaucracy functioning with complete impartiality. The gears run seamlessly, entirely indifferent to a leader's absence. Reaching this state requires a total rejection of the vulnerability trap. It demands engineering perception, utilizing calibrated fear, and institutionalizing power. True accountability is not the willingness to apologize. It is the operational discipline to bear the friction of command, enforce the structure, and build a machine that outlives you.